Morgan, and today I will be reading Chapter 13 of Charities Chosen by Ruby M. Ayres. Chapter 13. With her uncle's death ended another chapter of Charity's life. There followed dreary days of mourning, during which, as Harvey afterwards admitted, nothing would have been done but for Charity. Mrs. Atfield stayed in her room, bemoaning her misfortune and being fitted for the most expensive mourning. Myrtle came and went, with hard, defiant eyes that always carefully avoided Charity's, and with many regrets because now she would not be able to wear her mini trousseau frocks. "You look so beautiful in black," Charity tried timidly to comfort her. She was a little afraid of Myrtle since that night in Heather's flat. A barrier seemed to have arisen between them, which she was powerless to break down. "What does it matter how I look?" Myrtle retorted. "And anyway, I hate black." And she walked out of the room. Richard Pelham did not put in an appearance until the day of the funeral, when Charity was quick to notice that his lips were still badly swollen and bruised, and she wondered what explanation he had given to Myrtle. He took no notice of Charity, but once she found him looking at her across the room in a strange sort of way that brought the color rushing to her face. She remembered what Heather had said. "It is you he will say things about." "Well, I don't care," she told herself. After all, what harm could he do? She was surprised and touched by the number of people who came to pay their last respects to her uncle's memory. Quiet, retiring man as he had always seemed to be, he must have yet found time to make many friends and do many kindnesses. I don't know who half the people were who came to the church," she heard her aunt say afterwards, with a gratified note in her voice, "and the flowers were most overwhelmingly beautiful." Charity walked away feeling very sad. She did not believe that her aunt had shed a single tear, even though she had made a very pathetic and picturesque figure. In the evening, when Myrtle and her husband and the crowd of distant relatives had gone, Harvey came up to the schoolroom where Charity was sitting on a low stool by the fire, her hands clasped around her knees. "I don't wonder you like being up here better than downstairs," he began bluntly. "It's the nicest room in the house." He had never thought so, until he had grown to associate it with Charity, and his eyes were very wistful as he looked at her. "You've been a brick. I don't know what we should have done without you," he said gratefully. Charity turned her head and looked at him with far-away eyes. She was thinking of Heather, whom she had seen on the outskirts of the crowd that afternoon, and she was wondering whether Myrtle had seen him. "It's kind of you to say that," she answered absently. A line of pain showed in Harvey's smooth forehead. "You don't care if I'm kind or not," he said bluntly. She made no answer, and he broke out again. "Life's so jolly short, isn't it? It's so short that it makes you feel you ought to get everything you can out of it." "It makes you feel that nobody's ever half kind enough to anybody else," Charity said rather vaguely. "You mean that I might have been more decent to the governor, I suppose?" Harvey submitted. "Well, I think he was rather lonely," Charity said sadly. Harvey moved nearer to her. "I believe he liked you better than any of us," he told her. "He always looked happy when you were puttering about the study with him." "That's because he knew I was interested in the things that interested him," Charity explained. "I wish," said Harvey impulsively, "that now you would be interested in the things that interest me." She made a little grimace. "What things? Late nights and motor cars and having a good time, I suppose. No, thank you. That's not my idea of happiness at all." Tell me what it is, then," he urged. She shook her head. "You'd laugh. Besides," she broke off as her aunt's maid came into the room. "Mrs. Atfield would like to see you, please, Miss Charity." Charity scrambled to her feet. "I will come at once." Harvey caught her hand as she turned to go. "Don't be long. I'll wait here for you." Charity frowned. "Haven't you anything better to do?" she asked, and escaped. She found her aunt picturesquely arranged on a low couch by the fire in her room, surrounded by letters of condolence and sniffing at a large cut-glass scent bottle. "Shut the door and come here," she commanded briefly. Charity obeyed, a little chill at her heart. She had done her best for everyone in the house during the past trying week, and although she had certainly not expected either praise or thanks, her aunt's curt tone hurt her. She went forward slowly and stood beside the couch. Mrs. Atfield put down her scent bottle and looked up with cold eyes. "I want you to answer a few questions, if you please," she said. Charity said nothing, and her aunt went on. "I understand that you are friendly with a man named Hugh Heather." The hot blood rushed to Charity's face. We're not friendly. He doesn't like me at all, she answered impulsively. If you think that he does. Mrs. Atfield interrupted ruthlessly. It is a matter of complete indifference to me whether the man likes you or not. All I want to know is whether it is true that you visited him in his rooms. Charity's eyes faltered. Quite true, but she was waved into silence. Thank you, that is all I want to know. I should have spoken to you about this matter a week ago, only my great grief and trouble intervened, as you know. Mrs. Atfield rose to her feet with dignity. I have given you every chance to explain or deny, she went on untruthfully, and apparently you can neither explain nor deny, and so at the end of the week I am willing to give you until then in spite of what has happened. You must find another home. Charity stared at her with incredulous eyes. Find another home? She faltered. Oh, why? What have I done? You have done things which prove that you are entirely unfit to live in my house, her aunt asserted calmly. She had never liked Charity, although she had been glad to make use of her in many ways, and she had eagerly seized upon the gossip which Pelham had taken good care should reach her ears, to make it an excuse for getting rid of the girl. She went on, gaining courage from the sound of her own voice. You have been treated with the utmost kindness and generosity. Myrtle has made a friend of you, and I have given you my confidence. Your uncle trusted you. Charity burst out passionately. It is only because he is not here that you are saying such cruel things. If we were here, you would not dare. He was always kind to me. We were good friends. Your uncle did not know what I know. He would have been as horrified as I am if he had even suspected that you were on such friendly terms with that unspeakable man. I am not on any terms with him, Charity cried indignantly. It was always Myrtle he loved. Why, he doesn't even like me. Myrtle is a foolish girl who has at last seen the folly of her ways, Mrs. Atfield insisted firmly. And your last remark that Mr. Heather does not even like you makes your conduct all the more reprehensible. Where is your pride that you could go to his rooms night after night? She was drawing freely now upon her imagination and thoroughly enjoying herself. Charity took a step forward, her eyes blazing, her thin hands clenched. You are telling lies, and you know they are lies, she accused her aunt passionately. If I ever went to Mr. Heather's flat at all, it was only for Myrtle's sake. Mrs. Atfield stretched out her hand and rang the bell. I have said all that I have to say, and you may go. Kindly arrange to leave my house at the end of the week. Charity was quivering from head to foot with uncontrollable passion, and even her lips were white. And where can I go? She asked hoarsely. You know that I have no friends anywhere in England. Mrs. Atfield met the girl's eyes unflinchingly. I would suggest that you go to Mr. Heather, she said with a detestable inflection. There was a tragic silence. Then Charity turned and walked out of the room with a dreamlike feeling of unreality. I shall wake up soon. Soon I shall wake up, she told herself frantically, and she gave her wrist a sharp pinch, but it was no dream. She was wide awake enough. She passed the schoolroom door blindly to go to her own room. Harvey saw her and called out, Charity, where are you going? Come here. When she made no answer, he followed and caught her arm. Charity! Then he saw her face. Why, my dear little girl, what is it? He asked in distress. Charity was choking with the tears which she tried hard to keep back. I'm to go. I'm turned out of the house. He cried out indignantly. Who has dared to turn you out? What are you talking about? What has happened? But she broke away from him, and he heard the key turn in her bedroom door. He stood for a moment irresolute. Then he turned and dashed along the corridor to his mother. What's all this about Charity? He demanded indignantly. What have you been saying to her? My dear boy! Mrs. Atfield gazed at her son in amazement. She had never seen him so passionately distressed. Charity says she's got to go. She says she has been turned out. What has she done? Who has dared to do such a thing? Mrs. Atfield paled. I have told Charity she must leave this house at the end of the week, she said quietly. She has deceived me. She has behaved in a most disgraceful and underhand way. In what way? What has she done? When you can speak to me properly, Harvey, I will answer your question, and not before. his mother said with dignity. Harvey frowned and bit his lip. His blood was up in defense of Charity. He had not realized until now how deeply he cared for her. He could have almost found it in his heart to hate his mother for having made Charity cry. But after a moment he controlled himself enough to apologize. "I'm sorry if I was rude, but it's all such nonsense." Mrs. Atfield raised her well-marked brows. "Nonsense, because I object to your cousin visiting a man in his rooms at all hours of the day and night." Harvey stared at her, then he laughed. "Good Lord, what man? Charity doesn't know any men." "I'm referring to your friend, Mr. Heather," his mother answered icily. "Heather?" There was an amazed pause, then, "Oh, I say, what rot!" Harvey said scornfully. "Heather's mad about Myrtle, has been for years. I never saw a chap so smashed up by anything as he was over her marriage." Mrs. Atfield spread deprecating hands. "I know nothing about that. I only know that Charity has visited his rooms upon more than one occasion, and alone." Harvey flushed to the roots of his hair. "I don't believe she's ever been there in her life, except once when I took her, and that was the night I brought her up in the car from Southampton." "Charity has been there many times," his mother declared with conviction. He stared at her with baffled eyes. "Well, who told you?" he demanded at last. "I have heard from more than one source, but Richard was the last to speak of it. He went to Mr. Heather's flat the night your poor father died, and he found Charity there." "I don't believe it. And anyway, why did Pelham go to Hugh's flat? They hate one another like the devil always have done." "I only know that he did go, and that he found Charity there." "Pelham is the biggest liar I've ever met." "My dear boy, you're talking very foolishly. Mr. Heather may be your friend, but even you know the reputation he has always had with regard to women." "It's grossly exaggerated. Those sort of things always are. Heather's one of the best." Mrs. Atfield smiled with irritating calmness. "Naturally you stand up for your friend, but as far as Charity goes, even you can surely find no excuse for her conduct. The girl is a little heathen. She came here very much against my wish in the first place, and now that this has happened, I don't believe anything has happened. The whole thing is a trumped-up story. He broke off, remembering that from their first meeting, Charity had been greatly taken with Heather. Had she in some foolishly impulsive moment gone to his rooms? His heart burned with jealousy at the thought of such a possibility. She was young and unsophisticated, and had a supreme contempt for all conventions, and by her own naive confession, Heather had always attracted her. He stood for a moment, his mouth quivering. Then suddenly he turned. "I'll ask Charity herself. She'll tell me the truth." "Ask her by all means," his mother agreed placidly. Harvey went along to Charity's room and knocked. "Come out, Charity. I want to speak to you." "No, go away." "I shall stay here till you come out to speak to me." "No, go away." "I shall break the lock in if you don't open the door. Only for a moment. I'll only keep you for a moment." There was a little silence. Then he heard the key turn and Charity opened the door. "What do you want?" She had been crying furiously, and his heart ached for her. He wanted to put his arms round her and let her lay her head on his shoulder. He wanted to stroke her dark, fuzzy hair and tell her not to cry. But he knew how angry she would be, and besides, in his jealousy, he seemed to see Heather's grim face looking at him over her shoulder. "I've been talking to the mater, and she says—" He could not go on, but he caught her hand. "Charity, it's not true, is it? I don't know what you mean." "That you went to Heather's rooms, that you've often been there, and that Pelham found you there the night the governor died. He's such a damned liar, he'd say anything, I know, but if you'll just deny it." Charity tried to say no, but the word would not come. It was not that she was in the least afraid of the truth, or of Harvey, but that there was something in his eyes, something of complete faith in his ideal of her that was asking dumbly not to be shattered. She found her voice with an effort. "I was in Mr. Heather's rooms the night your father died. Yes, I was." He made a little choking sound. Only just that once. Or have you been there before? Have you, Charity?" She nodded, her troubled eyes on his face. "I have, yes, but—" He broke in upon her word. "Will you answer me one more question? Just one more. What is it? You're in love with him, aren't you? You do love him, don't you?" "I told you I did, the first night I came to London," said Charity. He stared at her aghast. She had spoken with such simple truth, and yet to him it sounded the veriest nonsense. In his estimation, people did not fall in love at first sight except between the pages of a novel, and yet she looked as if she really meant what she was saying, and though her color rose, her eyes did not waver. Harvey put his hands on her shoulders, and he was quick to feel how she shrank from his touch, gentle though it was. "Do you care enough for him to marry him?" Tears welled to her eyes. "But Harvey, he doesn't want to marry me. He doesn't even like me." His hand slipped from her shoulders, and for a moment he stood staring helplessly at her. Then he turned on his heel and walked away. She called after him, imploringly, "Harvey, where are you going?" He made no answer, and she went back into her room and locked the door. Harvey went downstairs. He took his hat and coat and went out into the street. It was raining a little, but he was unconscious of it. His heart was hot with bitter jealousy and anger against his friend. At the corner of the road he hailed a taxicab. "Where to, sir?" Harvey gave Hugh Heather's address. And that is the end of Chapter 13 of Charities Chosen by Ruby M. Ayres. Thank you for listening to this chapter with me, and I hope you return soon for the next one. Have a great day.